Good evening, friends. Today, the place we are going is the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Don't worry, we are not going there to discuss grand historical narratives. We are not going to touch those cold weapons and confrontations. We are simply going to be ordinary people and spend one utterly ordinary day in one of those precarious years. Now dim the lights, and with the sound of the clock, let us enter tonight's story together. At 6:30 in the morning, the sky over Moscow is a kind of gray, irresolute brightness. You are awakened by a faint but persistent scraping sound. In the next room, Uncle Pavel is once again laboriously polishing the only pair of leather shoes he wears to work with his worn-out brush. The sound is like a metronome, precisely announcing the start of a new day. The place where you live has a special name, a kommunalka. That is, a communal apartment. The word sounds almost cozy, but its birth came out of a violent social transformation. After the revolution, in order to solve the housing shortage in the cities, and also to break down class barriers, the government implemented a policy known as densification. Spacious apartments that had once belonged to the wealthy classes were divided up by thin partition walls. One family was crammed into each room, and so university professors, factory workers, demobilized soldiers, and descendants of former nobles became neighbors who could hardly avoid seeing one another, sharing a single kitchen, a single toilet, and a long, dim corridor. You slowly sit up, trying not to let the bed creak, so as not to wake your younger brother sleeping on the camp bed. The room is not large, just 15 or 16 square meters, but it has to contain the entire life of your family of four. One big bed, one camp bed, a wardrobe, a desk, on the wall hang family photographs and a propaganda poster about taking out the trash. This is your whole world. From the corridor comes a symphony of sounds. The bang of a faucet being turned violently on and off, the shrill whistle of an iron kettle boiling water, and Auntie Anna urging her daughter to hurry up in her booming voice. It is 6:30 in the morning now, the most tense hour in the apartment. The battle for the bathroom has already entered its white-hot stage. In this apartment, where 5 households and a total of 17 people live, the use of that single bathroom follows a set of unwritten rules stricter than state law. The family that goes to work earliest uses it first. The family with children who have to go to school goes next. This order has been worked out over years of coexistence. Once anyone tries to break it, a small-scale diplomatic crisis erupts. You quietly open the door and poke your head out. In the dim corridor, only one light is on. The light switches in this corridor are peculiar. Each switch controls one lamp, and each switch belongs to a particular family. To save electricity and avoid disputes, everyone turns on only the lamp they are responsible for. So the corridor is always patchy with light and shadow. You see that the light outside the bathroom door is on. That belongs to the Ivanov family in room No. 3. Which means it is their turn, you sigh. It looks like you will have to wait it at least another 20 minutes. This kind of life creates a peculiar psychological state. On the one hand, neighbors are forced into intimacy. You know who snores, who talks in their sleep, which couple argued last night, whose child failed an exam. In his memoirs, President Putin later even mentioned that one of the greatest pleasures of his childhood in a kommunalka in St. Petersburg was chasing rats on the filthy stairs, but on the other hand, this intimacy is full of wariness and distance. The cultural theorist Svetlana Boym once said that the communal apartment was a breeding ground for police informers because the space was so crowded. Privacy vanished completely. Snooping on neighbors and reporting them became all too easy. Sometimes people denounced a neighbor out of political conviction, but more often it may simply have been because, after that neighbor was taken away, they could get the coveted empty room. You lean against the doorframe, smelling the mixed odors in the air, last night's cabbage soup, cheap tobacco, and the damp soap smell drifting out of the bathroom. Did this life really cultivate the Soviet person who happily embraced collective living as originally envisioned? Or did it, on the contrary, produce an extremely boundary-conscious, wary, adaptive individualism? For you, the answer seems to lean toward the latter. You look at the tiny padlock on your own door, then think of the locked cabinet in the kitchen where the soap and toothpaste are kept. You feel that here, more than anywhere else, people understand what mine means. At last the bathroom door opens. The Ivanov's son comes out, bleary-eyed, and nods at you by way of greeting. Your turn. You slip inside at once and lock the door. This tiny space of a few square meters is the only moment in the morning when you can be alone. You look at your face in the mirror, not yet fully awake, and listen to the impatient cough of the next neighbor already sounding outside the door. You know that a new day has begun. You come out of the bathroom and walk straight toward the heart of the apartment. The smoke-blackened, perpetually noisy communal kitchen. This is the social center of the entire kommunalka, the news desk, the field hospital, and the Supreme Court. Almost all the daily loves and hatreds, gossip, dramatic quarrels, and good-natured jokes are played out here. The kitchen is large after all. Before the revolution, this building had been the mansion of a Tsarist general, but now the big space has been divided neatly among 5 households. Along the wall stand 5 small tables side by side, piled with each family's pots and pans. The gas stove has 4 burners, by unwritten convention. Rooms 1 and 2 share the 2 on the left. Your family in room 4 use the 2 on the right. And the retired teacher, living alone in room 5, has a burner of his own, as a sign of everyone's respect for him. You go to your family's table and take out your breakfast from the locked cabinet. A slice of black bread, a small piece of butter, and a tin filled with dark brown powder. Printed on the tin are a blue flower and a line of text, chicory. In the Soviet Union, real coffee beans are rare. They're luxuries for the elite, or for those who can buy them with foreign currency vouchers. For ordinary people, what wakes them up in the morning is this powder made from roasted and ground chicory root. Brewed, it looks very much like coffee, and it has a strong bitter aroma with a slight nuttiness. But it contains no caffeine. You spoon 2 spoonfuls of chicory powder into your cup and pour hot water over it. At once a familiar roasted fragrance spreads through the room. This thing, in fact, was not invented by the Soviets. Strangely enough, this poor man's coffee first became popular in 19th century France. At the time, Napoleon's continental system caused a shortage of coffee, and the French began drinking chicory root beverages in large quantities. Later, during the American Civil War, the Confederacy in the South also began drinking it under the Northern blockade. Who would have thought that across time, across space, and across ideology, this drink born of blockade and scarcity would become part of your daily life? You take a sip. The bitter liquid slides down your throat and wakes you fully. At that moment, your neighbor from room 4, Aunt Valentina, comes over. Holding an empty salt jar in her hand, she lowers her voice and says to your mother, "Dear, we're out of salt again. Could you lend me a little? Next week, when my daughter comes back from the meat packing plant, I'll have her bring you a sausage." Without changing her expression, your mother takes out the family's salt jar and pours some into hers. This is the most basic form of blat that happens in the kitchen every single day. Blat is a difficult word to translate precisely. It refers to a system of using personal connections, favor networks, and informal arrangements to obtain scarce goods and services. It is not simple bribery because many times no money is involved. It is an exchange of obligations. In those years when goods were always in short supply and official channels were always failing, blat was the lubricant and lifeline of everyday life. The shelves in the shops might be empty, but if you had blat, your refrigerator might still be full. If the sales clerk in the butcher shop was your cousin's classmate, you could always get the best cut of meat. If the ticket seller at the theater was your neighbor's nephew, then you could see the hottest ballet in town. This system was everywhere. It formed a real and efficient economy of personal ties, parallel to the official planned economy. Aunt Valentina leaves, satisfied. Your mother glances at you and says softly, "Remember this, next week remind me her daughter owes us a sausage." As you chew your black bread, you look around the kitchen. It is like a miniature Soviet society. Everyone publicly proclaims the nobility of collectivism. But in private, everyone calculates carefully for the sake of their own little household. Everyone depends on this informal network built from neighborhood ties. And at the same time, everyone remains slightly wary of the others within it. You finish the last sip of your chicory coffee, wash your cup and plate clean. Put them carefully back into your family's cabinet, and lock it. Time to go to work. You hurry down the stairs and merge into the crowd flowing toward the bus stop. The morning Moscow air is sharp and cold, and the streets are already full of the clamor of vehicles. Your means of transport today is a somewhat shabby trolleybus. Its two poles rest on the overhead wires and emit a crackling sound, like a tame but heavy beetle slowly pulling up to the stop. The doors open, you squeeze aboard with the crowd. The carriage is already packed, filled with a mingled smell of damp wool, old newspapers, and faint sweat. You grab a cold metal handrail to steady yourself. Here there is no ticket seller shouting, and no one checking tickets. Soviet ground transportation buses, trams, trolleybuses mostly operates on a kind of highly trusting honor system. In the middle of the carriage there is an inconspicuous metal box with a coin slot and a crank. By the rules, every passenger after boarding is supposed to drop a 5-kopeck coin into the box, then turn the crank and take a tick. The whole process depends on self-discipline. You could perfectly well take a ticket without paying at all, or even put in a coin of smaller value. You fish a 5-kopeck coin out of your pocket and with effort squeeze through the crowd to the box. You drop the coin in. After a crisp clink, you turn the crank and tear off a thin paper ticket printed with numbers. You put it in your pocket. It is not only your proof of fare, it is also proof to your own conscience that you are an enlightened Soviet citizen. Of course, not everyone is as conscientious as you. Out of the corner of your eye, you see a young man casually turn the crank and take a ticket without paying. Almost at the same moment, an elderly woman in a headscarf with piercing eyes, the kind people simply call a babushka, speaks up. Her voice is not loud, but it cuts through everything. "Young man, has a dog eaten your conscience? The state has given us such convenient transportation, and you won't even pay 5 kopecks. How can you justify that?" The young man's face turns red. Under the judging gaze of the surrounding passengers, he awkwardly fumbles in his pocket for a coin and drops it in. This is the real supervisory force behind the honor system. Not uniformed inspectors, but the sharp eyes of the people. That invisible social pressure is far more effective than any fine. Of course, the system is not perfect, the Soviet public transportation network. Though vast and carrying astonishing passenger volumes reportedly, the average Soviet citizen traveled more than twice as many miles by public transport as a Western European, was also much criticized for poor management, aging equipment, and frequent accidents. There were even reports that the military worried about its wartime transport capacity. This stood in sharp contrast to the Moscow metro, which resembled an underground palace. Metro stations were decorated with magnificent mosaics, heroic sculptures, and glittering chandeliers. At the entrance stood strict coin-operated turnstiles. Every detail proclaimed the great achievements of socialist construction and the absolute power of the state. Above ground, by contrast, this rattling trolleybus and its trust-based ticketing system seemed plain, casual, even a little naive. Some sociologists believe the honor system worked not entirely because passengers were morally elevated, but more because of an economic calculation. When passenger flow was enormous, the cost of employing large numbers of ticket sellers and inspectors may have been higher than the money lost to fare evasion. So rather than a moral experiment, it was a pragmatic choice. treating a certain rate of fare dodging as an acceptable operating cost. The state, meanwhile, skillfully packaged it as trust in and praise for the political consciousness of its citizens. You watch the building sliding quickly backward outside the window and think to yourself, perhaps it was both. In this country, many things are like that. Behind idealistic slogans, there is often the most practical of calculations. The trolleybus jolts, pulling you out of your thoughts. Factory is almost here. You walk through the factory gate, punch in, change into blue work clothes. The air is full of the smell of machine oil and metal filings. In the huge workshop, the roar of the machines is deafening. Your day officially begins, unfolding within this familiar rhythm. But beneath all this noise, another invisible ghost lingers. Its name is Alexei Stakhanov. On August 31, 1935. A supposedly ordinary miner in the Donbass, Stakhanov was said to have mined 102 tons of coal in less than a 6-hour shift, 14 times the norm at the time. This astonishing number turned him into a hero across the Soviet Union overnight. The Soviet state quickly seized upon the example, and thus began the Great Stakhanovite movement. The title of Stakhanovite worker was awarded to workers who broke production records and exceeded quotas. They could receive substantial bonuses, brand new apartments, even automobiles. Their photographs were printed in newspapers. They became models for all workers to emulate. Stalin once uttered a line that later became famous everywhere. Life has become better, comrades. Life has become more joyful. This became the motto of the whole movement, implying that hard work could be exchanged for a happy life. And yet, you and your fellow workers all know the secret hidden behind that myth. Stakhanov's miracle was not accomplished by his own strength alone. According to details later revealed, in order to create the record, the mine management had prepared the best tools for him in advance and arranged for other workers to do a great deal of supporting labor behind the scenes, clearing the shaft, reinforcing supports, and so on. In reality, it was a carefully staged team effort, but in the propaganda, all of the credit went to him alone. That beautified ghost still wanders the workshop to this day. On the wall hangs the production chart, and the target numbers on it rise every year, as if silently pressing every person onward. But these unrealistic targets have not brought any true leap in productivity. Instead, they have produced a distinctive, utterly chaotic work pattern. Storming. Every month, the storm comes once, and it has 3 fixed stages. The beginning of the month is called hibernation, because of the insane final push of the previous month. Everyone is exhausted and new materials and paperwork have not yet arrived. The whole workshop is sluggish and inefficient. By the middle of the month comes the warm-up period. People begin slowly getting into gear, but the end of the month is still far off, so no one is in a hurry. The real madness begins in the last week of the month, the fever period. In order to fulfill that astronomical production plan, management begins issuing harsh orders. Workers are forced into overtime after overtime, and the machines run 24 hours a day without stopping. Because time is short, some proper procedures are skipped, some substandard substitute materials are used, and the quality of the products can be imagined. But as long as the numbers can be made up before the end of the month and the report can be filed, everything can somehow be smoothed over. Then the next month begins, and a new round of hibernation starts again. You watch your fellow workers operating their machines at an unhurried pace, and know perfectly well that today is only the 5th. The fever period is still a long way off. This rhythm of work leaves everyone with a deep sense of powerlessness and alienation. You are just one bolt in an enormous machine, driven by a force you cannot understand and cannot control. This has also led to a major debate. What exactly motivated Soviet workers? Early Western totalitarian school scholars argued that workers labored under coercion and fear. But later revisionist scholars pointed out that one cannot ignore the power of ideology. Many workers, especially in the early years, sincerely believed they were building a great socialist state, and were full of revolutionary enthusiasm. Other scholars argue that most workers actually adopted a more pragmatic strategy. They neither fully believed the propaganda nor lived in constant terror. They simply struggled for the survival of themselves and their families within the rules that existed. As the widely circulated joke had it, "They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work." You feel that perhaps there is a little truth in every explanation? You do not hate your work. You are proud to be part of the glorious working class. But you also dislike this end-of-month frenzy. It makes your labor feel meaningless. You are simply fulfilling your duty as a citizen, completing your task, collecting your wages, and feeding your family. Perhaps that is the truest motivation of all. The lunch bell rings in the workshop, its sharp sound briefly drowning out the roar of the machines. Time to go to the canteen. You walk laughing and chatting with your fellow workers toward the factory canteen, the stolovaya. In Russian, the word simply means canteen. It is an indispensable part of Soviet urban life, found everywhere, in factories, schools, government offices. The birth of the stolovaya carried the ideals of the early revolution. The Bolsheviks believed that home cooking was kitchen slavery, that binding women to pots and pans was an inefficient waste of resources. So they established these communal dining halls aiming to liberate women from domestic labor so they could devote themselves, like men, to work in factories and on farms. It was a grand experiment in reshaping social structure through the collectivization of eating. You pick up a metal tray and shuffle slowly forward in the long line. The canteen food is nothing to rave about, but it is cheap, filling, and supposedly adheres strictly to the standards laid down in the state's book of tasty and healthy food. The variety almost never changes. There is always vitamin salad, which is chopped cabbage and shredded carrot drowned in mayonnaise to add calories. There is a steaming bowl of borscht. The staple is always mashed potatoes or buckwheat. Today's main dish is the canteen's signature item, the fried cutlet. You look at the grayish, roundish patty on your tray, and an old familiar complaint rises in your mind. This is the mysterious meat cutlet passed down in Soviet memory from generation to generation. No one can say exactly what it contains. The official recipe says minced meat, but to save money and bulk it out, cooks always mix in large amounts of breadcrumbs, mashed potatoes, or even oats. So every bite is a small adventure. Sometimes you bite into obvious gristle. Sometimes its texture is so soft it feels like a lump of dough. Among the people there even circulates a bit of black humor. Meat pies sold by street vendors are called kitten pies, a way of mocking the suspiciously sourced filling. Carrying your tray, you find an empty seat and sit down. And despite the questionable quality of the food, the canteen really does serve its social function. Here, the shop foreman and the new apprentice eat the same meals and complain about the same cutlets. That shared, slightly bitter experience actually brings people closer together and creates a distinctive kind of canteen comradeship. Here, people exchange shop floor gossip, discuss last night's football match, or plan where to go fishing over the weekend. You prod the mysterious cutlet with your fork. It trembles faintly, as though silently acknowledging all of these complex truths. You sigh and put it in your mouth. The taste, well, is as full of mystery as ever, but it has enough calories. After all, there are still 4 more hours of work to get through this afternoon. After lunch there is a short break. Instead of smoking and chatting with the others, you walk to the propaganda board at the entrance to the workshop and pick up that day's issue of Pravda. Pravda, the name itself, means truth in Russian. As the official newspaper of the Soviet state, reading it is not merely a matter of following the news. It is also a political duty and a habit of life. In the Soviet era, party and state cadres and intellectuals, alike almost all had a copy. The paper is professionally laid out, the type is clear, and occasionally it includes carefully selected photographs. It covers science, economics, culture, and many other subjects, but conspicuously not the sensational social news or scandals you would find in Western newspapers. You open the newspaper with practiced ease and quickly scan the front page headline. It's a long report about yet another record wheat harvest at some collective farm, illustrated by a smiling woman tractor driver. You are used to these numbers and slogans. What you really want to read are the things hidden between the lines. Decades of life have given ordinary Soviet people a special skill: reading silence in official propaganda. You do not care so much about what the paper says as about what it does not say or how it says it. For example, if the paper suddenly begins repeatedly emphasizing the speeches of a certain leader, that may mean his power has recently been consolidated. If a name that used to appear frequently suddenly disappears, he has probably fallen into trouble. If an article on industrial policy changes its wording from "must be resolutely implemented" to "should be steadily advanced," there may be a major policy shift hidden behind it. Today you notice a short item about light industrial goods mentioning the need to better satisfy the people's growing material and cultural needs. You turn it over in your mind. Perhaps that is a signal. Perhaps it means there will be a few more consumer goods in the shops soon. The thought gives you a small flicker of hope. At last the quitting whistle blows. You take off your work clothes and step out of the factory gate, feeling your whole body loosen. On your way home, you pass a State Department store and suddenly notice a small crowd gathered at the entrance and still growing. Your heart tightens, your body reacts before your brain does. Something is happening in the Soviet Union. A queue appearing out of nowhere is the clearest possible signal. The shop has received some scarce item. It might be a batch of Hungarian leather shoes, or a crate of Cuban oranges, or simply a roll of better quality toilet paper. No one knows exactly what it is, but that does not matter. What matters is to get in line first. You hurry over and, with the practice formula, ask the woman at the end of the line, "Excuse me, who's the last one?" She turns and points to herself. "I am. You go behind me, all right. I'm after you." This simple exchange is like a sacred ritual, formally declaring you a member of the queue. Now you and this woman are joined in a temporary alliance of attack and defense, jointly protecting your place in line and watching for anyone trying to cut in. Queuing is a profound art in Soviet life and also a distinctive social institution. It has its own full set of etiquette and unwritten rules. You can step away briefly to take care of something, as long as you speak to the people in front of and behind you. They will hold your place. But you cannot be gone too long, or it will be taken as an automatic surrender of your spot. For those strategic queues that last days or even months, such as buying furniture, registering for an apartment, or purchasing a Lada car, people develop even more complex organizational forms. Those in line spontaneously form a committee and draw up a detailed list. Everyone gets a number, and to prevent cheating, the number is written directly on each person's palm in ink. The committee also establishes roll calls twice a day, morning and evening. Anyone who misses roll call has their name ruthlessly crossed off the list. Standing in this ever-lengthening queue, you begin chatting with the people in front of and behind you. This is another important function of queuing: social life. The queue is a temporary center of information exchange and community. Here you can hear the latest political rumors, discuss which shop has better sausage, complain about your boss, even make new friends, or discover, through conversation, that someone ahead of you happens to have exactly the black connection you desperately need. More than an hour passes, the queue crawls forward. At last you can see the shop window. It turns out the great prize is a shipment of Czechoslovak-made sneakers. That is a good thing indeed, more stylish and more durable than the domestic kind. You feel a surge of excitement and begin calculating the family savings in your head. But the sky is growing dark, and your wife and child are still waiting at home for dinner. You begin to hesitate. Should you keep waiting for these shoes that you may or may not be able to buy? Or should you give up and go home first? Just then, a man beside you quietly says to another, "Hey, I've been standing here for 2 hours. I'll sell you my place. 5 rubles, what do you say? Something stirs in you. So even the queue itself has become a business. This art is truly far more complicated than it looks. As you wait in line for those elusive check sneakers, your fingers unconsciously rub the soft, foldable net bag in your pocket. This is the indispensable tool every Soviet citizen carries when going out. It has a name full of fatalism and possibility, the Avoska. The word is hard to translate precisely. Roughly, it means maybe, perhaps, what if it works out? It carries a feeling of resignation before fate and hope for good luck. The popularity of the name is said to go back to a 1935 sketch by the famous Soviet comedian Arkady Rykin. On stage, holding up a net bag, he said to the audience, "This is an Avoska. What if I happen across something good on the way home?" The line hit every Soviet person's funny bone and sore spot exactly, because that hope of what if I can manage to buy something was something everyone understood deeply. From then on, the name Avoska spread everywhere. You take the net bag out of your pocket. In your hand, it looks like a little bundle of fishing net. But as soon as you spread it open, it magically expands into a huge, highly elastic bag. It is said that the strongest Avoskas can hold up to 70 kilograms. Its advantages are obvious. Folded, it takes up almost no space. It can be tucked into any pocket or handbag, keeping you constantly prepared for any unexpected shopping opportunity. Because Soviet shops do not provide bags, you must bring your own container. Interestingly, this iconic object, so full of Soviet everyday life, was not actually invented in the Soviet Union. Its homeland is in fact Czechoslovakia. In the 1920s, a Czech businessman named Vavřin Kirchel originally made women's hairnets. But business was poor, and the hairnets would not sell. Then inspiration struck him. He attached handles to them and sold them as shopping bags. That accidental invention unexpectedly found its greatest success in the Soviet Union decades later. Even more striking is the fact that in the Soviet Union, many Avoskas were produced by enterprises under the All-Russian Association of the Blind, which gave them an added aura of social welfare. The Avoska was not merely a shopping bag, it was the material embodiment of a mentality. The patience, optimism, and readiness to seize opportunity that one had to possess in an environment of scarcity and unpredictable supply. Every day when you leave the house and tuck an empty Avoska into your pocket, the gesture itself is full of symbolism. It represents your tiny hope that today might bring some unexpected good fortune. And when, on your way home, you carry a heavy Avoska full of potatoes, onions, or a bottle of milk, the sense of satisfaction and victory is hard to describe. Some believe the Avoska is a mournful symbol of the failure of the planned economy and material shortages, a helpless expedient by which people struggled to survive in difficult circumstances. But more people prefer to see it as an expression of Russian resilience, optimism, and popular ingenuity. It represents an ability to create something out of nothing, a philosophy of life that says there will always be a way. The line shuffles forward another little step. You look at the dense black mass of people ahead, then squeeze the empty net bag in your pocket again. Will that what-if kind of luck fall on you today? You do not know. You only know that no matter what, tomorrow when you go out, you will still carry it. Life has to have some hope to hold on to, doesn't it? In the end, you give up on the sneakers. It is getting late. Concern for your family triumphs over the desire for stylish consumer goods, and you drag your tired steps back home. And before long, a sweeping housing reform begins from the late 1950s into the 1960s in order to solve the extremely severe housing shortage. Khrushchev launched an unprecedented mass construction campaign. At its core was the use of prefabricated concrete panels to build vast numbers of standardized apartment blocks quickly and cheaply, as if assembling building blocks. This decision was a total repudiation of the Stalin-era imperial style of architecture, with its grandeur and ornate decoration. Khrushchev publicly criticized Stalinist buildings as ostentatious and wasteful. What he championed was pure functionalism, stripped of all unnecessary ornament. And so tens of thousands of families, including yours, said goodbye to the cramped and noisy communalka and moved into apartments of their own, with separate kitchens and bathrooms. This was the famous Khrushchevka, to have a private space whose door could be shut against outside intrusion, had been the dream of generations. Yet once you truly move in, you slowly begin to feel the countless troubles hidden behind this quickly built happiness. You walk into the stairwell. There is no elevator because 5 stories are considered a height that does not require one. You climb to the 4th floor and open the front door. What greets you is an extremely narrow entryway. The kitchen is only about 5 square meters. So small that only one person can turn around comfortably in it. If the whole family wants to eat in the kitchen at once, that is practically impossible. The bathroom and toilet have been combined into a single tiny compartment, officially called a combined sanitary unit. At the time this was considered a space-saving design, but in actual use, it is highly inconvenient. Worst of all, the walls are as thin as paper. You can hear almost clearly the television next door. The sound of children running upstairs, even a couple arguing in low voices. Often you begin to wonder whether you have merely moved from one large kommunalka into a beehive made up of countless little kommunalki. You walk into the kitchen and open the window to let in some air. Beneath the window is one of the strangest inventions of the age. The Khrushchev fridge. It is not actually an electrical appliance but a cupboard built into the outside wall of the kitchen. Because the walls are thin, in the freezing winter, its temperature is almost the same as the outdoors, which makes it perfect for storing food. At the time, the design was promoted as an ingenious innovation, but one side effect is that it also turns the whole kitchen into something like an ice cellar. The transition from the kommunalka to the Khrushchevka was a profound reshaping of Soviet social structure. It exchanged chaotic but humanly warm collective life for a defective, cramped sort of privacy. Supporters argue that whatever the countless shortcomings of the Khrushchevka, under the historical conditions of the time, it improved the living conditions of tens of millions of people with unprecedented speed and scale. It gave ordinary families privacy and dignity. It was one of the most direct expressions of the state's concern for people's livelihoods in the process of de-Stalinization. Critics, however, argue that it was a short-sighted policy that treated the symptoms but not the root problem. These cheap buildings, designed to last only 25 to 50 years, later became a massive burden on the urban development of all the post-Soviet states, turning into vast expanses of decayed, overcrowded, hard-to-renovate slums. You lean against the cold window frame and look out at row after row of identical Khrushchevki, with points of light coming on in the dusk. To you, those debates are too grand. You only know that this is your home. Imperfect, but at least your own. Here you can shut the door and keep the noise of the whole world outside. Night deepens, the children are already asleep. You and your wife sit in that kitchen of only 5 square meters with a kettle warming on the stove. This is the most precious and private moment of your day. In the Soviet Union, especially among urban intellectuals and ordinary town families, the little kitchen played an extraordinarily important, almost sacred role. It was not merely a place to cook, but the family's confessional, refuge of the soul, and free harbor of thought. Once the apartment door was shut, and the kitchen door left just slightly ajar, this became a safe space where people could speak freely and exchange their real thoughts. This distinctive cultural phenomenon came to be known as the kitchen conversation. The scene forms a strange and ironic echo of the famous kitchen debate decades earlier. In 1959, at the American National Exhibition in Moscow, then U.S. Vice President Nixon and Soviet leader Khrushchev confronted one another in a model kitchen in a sharp debate over the merits of capitalism and socialism. Nixon pointed to dishwashers and juicers and declared that capitalist consumer goods could liberate women from heavy domestic labor. Khrushchev countered that these were nothing but gilded bourgeois cages, and that under communism women attained real liberation through participation in social labor. That debate turned the tiny kitchen into the front line of Cold War ideological confrontation. For you and your wife, however, the meaning of the kitchen is far more concrete. Today in the workshop, I heard people say next month's bonus may be canceled. You say quietly, blowing on the tea in your cup. Your wife sighs, I stood in line for 2 hours today trying to buy our son a new pair of shoes. They were sold out just before it got to me. And milk has gone up in price as she speaks. She skillfully soaks the clothes she changed out of today in a basin, preparing to wash them by hand. Your conversation touches on a widespread dilemma faced by Soviet women, the double burden. Official ideology proclaims equality between men and women. Women, like men, work full-time and are honored as laborers. But social tradition and lived reality still require them after work to shoulder almost all the housework and child rearing. Men can come home and read the paper or watch television. For women, the second shift is just beginning. You watch your wife's tired profile and slip your own lump of sugar into her tea. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rings. It is your old friend Dmitry. You served in the same army unit, and now he works as an engineer at another factory. He is someone you can trust completely. He is carrying a bottle of vodka. As soon as he comes in, he gives you a warm embrace. Your wife brings out some pickled cucumbers and a plate of sliced black bread and sets them on the little kitchen table. The three of you squeeze into the cramped space and shut the door. From the radio, turned down to the faintest volume, a patriotic song is playing. It is there to provide a bit of cover for your conversation. A few shots of vodka go down, and the mood turns warm and relaxed. Dmitry lowers his voice, with a slightly sly and conspiratorial smile on his face. He says, "Hey, heard a new one about Brezhnev." You and your wife understand immediately, and lean forward involuntarily. In the Soviet Union, sharing a political joke, an anecdote, is a distinctive social ritual requiring a high degree of trust. It is like a street password instantly sorting out who is one of your own. Telling an ill-timed joke in the Stalin era might send you to the Gulag. One famous joke from that time asked how the laborers building the White Sea-Baltic Canal were divided. On the right bank were those who told jokes. On the left bank were those who listened to them. By the Brezhnev era, the political climate was relatively looser, but telling political jokes in public was still risky. So it could happen only within the most private, most trusted circles, such as this kitchen right now. Dmitry clears his throat and begins. Brezhnev is holding a Politburo meeting in the Kremlin. Reading from a prepared text, he says, "Comrades, the problem of senility in our Politburo has become very serious. For example, Comrade Pelsh doesn't even recognize himself anymore. This morning I said to him, 'Hello, Comrade Pelsh,' and he answered, 'Hello, Leonid Ilyich, but I'm not Pelsh.' Brezhnev pauses, then continues, 'And Comrade Andropov? He's just like a child.' He keeps stealing the rubber duck from my desk. Finally, he looks around in confusion and asks, 'By the way, at Comrade Grechko's funeral, when the music started, was I really the only one who thought of inviting a lady to dance? And by the way, why is he absent today?' You and your wife cannot help bursting into laughter, but you quickly cover your mouths with your hands and stifle the sound. The joke precisely mocks the aging of the leadership at the time, Brezhnev's own forgetfulness and senile confusion, and his well-known greed for medals and honors. These anecdotes are like funhouse mirrors. Using exaggeration and absurdity, they reflect the most real contradictions and pathologies of Soviet society. They are crystallizations of popular wit, and also one way ordinary people resist the state's grand narrative. When official language becomes ever more rigid, hollow, and detached from reality, these spicy, vivid jokes become tools by which people speak truth and preserve their sanity. Dmitry tells a few more jokes, with vodka and pickled cucumbers. The three of you spend a cheerful evening amid suppressed laughter. After Dmitry leaves, you clear away the bottle and glasses. The kitchen grows quiet again, but in the air there seems to remain a trace of the brief warmth brought by laughter. It is a rare sunny weekend. After dinner, you decide to take a walk with your family in Gorky Park. The Gorky Central Park of Culture and Leisure is one of Moscow's most famous public spaces. When it opened in 1928, it was never meant to be merely an ordinary park. Its mission was to provide the new proletariat with a cultured place for leisure, replacing the entertainment forms of the old era that were deemed decadent and corrupt, such as taverns and gambling houses. The park had exhibition halls, an open-air theater, sports facilities, even a small zoo. Everything was intended to shape and cultivate the new Soviet person through entertainment that also instructed. Your family strolls down the broad, tree-lined avenue. Around you are little clusters of people, couples holding hands, young parents pushing prams, groups of young pioneers chasing and shrieking. The air smells of ice cream and faint fresh grass. Here you feel, at least for the moment, freed from the noise of the factory and the crowding of the apartment. Your body and mind both relax. You tell your son about a legendary amusement attraction in the park that has long since disappeared, the parachute tower. In the pre-war 1930s, a steel tower 35 meters high stood in the park. At that time, aviation and military sports were immensely popular nationwide, and famous pilots were national idols. The tower was a product of that age. Did people jump from the top? Your son asks curiously. You smile and shake your head, explaining the secret of the bizarre attraction. In fact, it was not a real parachute tower at all. 35 meters was nowhere near enough height for a parachute to open safely. It was more like a parachute simulator. Visitors were strapped to a fake parachute attached to a specially tensioned cable. When you leapt from the platform, the cable let you descend slowly and safely, giving you something like the sensation of parachuting. More interesting still, for people who climbed to the top but then did not dare to jump, the designers had prepared another way down, an enormous spiral slide running from the top to the ground. Those who lost their nerve could sit on a mat and slide down instead. Equally thrilling, equally fun. You also tell your son a little secret from those days. According to old people's recollections, the ones who dared to jump were mostly girls, while many young men climbed up and then finally slunk down the slide instead. That parachute tower perfectly embodied the dual character of Soviet leisure culture in that era. It was both exciting entertainment and a form of quasi-military patriotic education. Even play had to serve the defense of the motherland. After the war began, the tower really was used as a military observation post to watch for Nazi aircraft. After the war, because its wooden structure had decayed, it was dismantled. You walked to the bank of the Moscow River and watched the afterglow of sunset spill across the water in glittering ripples. You watch your son running happily on the grass, your wife's face lit by a gentle smile. At moments like this, to have a place where you can enjoy a little peace and beauty with your family, that is enough. When you get home, you quietly close the door and carefully pull from an old suitcase under the bed something wrapped in cloth. You unwrap it. Inside is a thin, translucent disc. In the dim light of the desk lamp, you can clearly see the image of a human skeleton on the disc. It is a discarded chest X-ray. And yet on this eerie canvas, there are tightly packed grooves, just like those on a vinyl record. This is the legendary bone record, or by its Russian name, Röntgenizdat, literally X-ray publishing. In the years when Western culture was tightly sealed off, it was a strange vehicle for the underground circulation of music in the Soviet Union. You place the bone record gently on the old record player and lower the needle. After a burst of crackling static, as if from a distant planet, a voice you have never heard before spills out of the speaker, full of energy. It is Elvis. It is the Beatles. It is the rock music denounced by official media as the decadent and depraved noise of capitalism. The process by which these records were made is itself a legend full of popular ingenuity and rebellious spirit. In the 1950s and 1960s, a group of young people known as the Stilyagi, the fashionable youth, longed for access to Western jazz and rock. But official channels were completely blocked. So some highly skilled underground technicians came up with a brilliant idea. They collected old X-ray films from hospitals that were being discarded as trash. By regulation, these flammable films could not be stored long in hospitals and had to be destroyed regularly. This gave them a steady supply of raw material. Using large scissors, they cut the X-ray sheets into 7-inch circles. Then, with a modified old recording lathe, they engraved onto the X-ray film music copied from Western radio broadcasts or smuggled master recording. Finally, using a lit cigarette, they burned a standard center hole in the disc. And thus a bone record was born. Its sound quality was terrible, full of noise and distortion, and it could only be played a few dozen times before wearing out. But for thirsty souls, it was heavenly music. These records circulated secretly on the black market at no small price. One would usually sell for 1 to 1.5 rubles. You close your eyes and let the unfamiliar melody and rhythm strike your senses. You do not understand the lyrics, but that does not matter. What matters is the freedom, abandon, and carelessness carried by the music itself. It forms a powerful contrast to the solemn, collective, rule-bound atmosphere of your daily life. It is not a political manifesto, but a direct emotional expression, a vibrant voice belonging to the individual. How great an influence did this undercurrent of Western culture really have on Soviet society? That remains a perennial subject of Cold War scholarship. Some, such as Thomas Nichols, argue that rock music played a crucial role in undermining the Soviet system. By humanizing the West, it broke the official propaganda image of the enemy and alienated a whole generation of young people from the rigid political order, eventually igniting a youth revolution. But other scholars are more cautious. They argue that this view exaggerates the political power of music. Most listeners, they say, cared about the musical, cultural, and personal experience itself, not some supposed capitalist ideology behind it. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the result of long-term accumulation of deep economic, political, and social contradictions. To assign the credit or blame to a few rock songs is an overly simplistic, Western-centered interpretation. The X-ray disc is still spinning on the record player. An unnamed guitarist is in the middle of a wild solo. You do not know which view is right. You only know that at this moment, in this little dark room, the music coming from the bones gives you a sense of vivid life you have not felt in a long time. It is like a crack through which you can glimpse the broad and different world beyond the wall. When the music ends, you carefully put the precious bone record away. Just before bed, your wife brings out a small plate, a few slices of homemade pickled cucumber, and a spoonful of bright red strawberry jam spread on black bread. "Try it, we just brought it back from the dacha today," she says. You take a bite. The crisp cucumber and the sweet jam mingle in your mouth. It is a familiar, reassuring taste. That taste comes from your family's dacha. Dacha is usually translated as country cottage or summer house. But the word contains far more than that translation suggests. It refers to the small plot of land that Soviet urban residents had in the suburbs or countryside, along with the little cabin usually built on it by their own hands. It was both a place for weekends and summer holidays, and the family's second food base. The word dacha is said to come from Old Russian and to mean something given. Originally, it referred to land granted by the Tsar to nobles. But in the Soviet period, it became a unique social phenomenon on a massive scale. The state allocated small plots of land to city residents, usually 600 square meters, and encouraged them to grow vegetables and fruit there in order to compensate for the state agricultural system's shortcomings in food supply. These tiny private plots produced astonishingly much. There is a widely circulated, almost unbelievable statistic. In the 1960s, these private plots made up less than 3% of the country's cultivated land. Yet they produced about 64% of the Soviet Union's potatoes, 43% of its vegetables, 39% of its milk, and 66% of its eggs. The figures say silently how inefficient the collective farm model was. and they also show what miracles individual labor could create in the limited spaces where it was allowed to exist. For your family, the dacha has a double meaning. On the one hand, it is a guarantee of survival in an age when shop shelves are often empty. The potatoes, tomatoes, cucumbers, and berries from your own garden are the most important source of food on the table. At the end of summer and beginning of autumn, your wife turns the harvest into jars of preserves and jam, enough to last the whole winter. On the other hand, it is also a spiritual refuge. Starting on Friday afternoon, you begin longing to escape the crowded Khrushchevka in the city and go to your own little patch of earth. At the dacha, there is no factory noise, no neighbors peering into your life, no endless meetings and political study. You can work shirtless in the garden, fish in the river, sit on the porch of the little cabin and drink tea in a daze. It is a brief freedom and autonomy, but infinitely precious. Working at the dacha is indeed exhausting. Almost the whole weekend is spent hoeing, watering, and weeding. But this labor feels completely different from the alienated labor of the factory, where you work only to fulfill quotas. Here, every drop of sweat you shed is for your own family. What you see are real fruits and vegetables, not numbers in a production report. So the dacha is both a necessity for survival and a spiritual luxury. It is like a small living patch embroidered by the people themselves onto the huge, rigid coat of the Soviet system. After your late night snack, you walk to the window to draw the curtains and go to sleep. Through the glass, beyond the layered rooftops of the city, you look into the distance. At the far edge of the night, in the heart of Moscow, there are 5 brilliant points of light, like rubies, burning for a long time in the deep blue sky. They are the famous red stars atop the Kremlin's Spasskaya, Nikolskaya, Troitskaya, Borovitskaya, and Vodovzvodnaya towers. They are the most powerful and central symbol of the country. In 1937, to replace the double-headed eagle emblem of the old Tsarist era, the Soviet Union's top engineers and artists created these 5 technically sophisticated stars. They are not simple light bulbs. They are made of 3 layers of specially produced ruby glass in different shades. Inside are giant bulbs of up to 0 watts, equipped with complex cooling systems to prevent overheating. At the base of each star is a precision bearing, allowing it to rotate with the wind like a weather vane, reducing wind pressure. You gaze at that distant, perfect red glow. It represents an ideal, a grand narrative, a united, powerful socialist motherland moving toward victory. It appears in every textbook you have ever read, in every newsreel you have ever watched, in every holiday parade. Then you turn back and look at your own little home. This narrow Khrushchevka apartment, this little kitchen that has witnessed countless kitchen conversations. The bone record hidden beneath the bed with its smuggled rock music, and the jars in the storeroom from the dacha still giving off the smell of earth. That distant, perfect red star and this imperfect reality close at hand together, they make up the whole of your life. You're both the glorious Soviet citizen, illuminated by the red star's radiance, and the ordinary person who struggles to survive in the trifles and shortages of daily life by means of small wits, small compromises, and small networks of personal ties. You draw the curtains, shutting out that faraway light. In the room there is nothing left but the steady breathing of you and your family.